The most important thing when starting a new coding job isn't the amount of work you do, or the quality of the work you do for that matter. It's something completely different. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Vincent and I've been working as a programmer during a summer internship now for about a month. And in this video I was going to tell you the 8 big mistakes that I made during my first month as a programmer so that you don't have to make these mistakes. And the good thing with all of these mistakes is that they are easily avoidable. So if you watch the entire video, you will be very prepared for your first coding job and you will not have to hopefully repeat the same mistakes that I've done. And this is the video I wish I had when I was starting off as a programmer just a month ago. Now starting off with number 1, and that is working too hard. Now I remember getting into work having this mindset that okay, I was going to work so hard, I was going to create the best code, I was going to write code all day, and I was just going to perform so incredibly well during work. That was the main task. And then as I was walking to work, my dad texted me and he said, be sure to pay attention to your colleagues, build friendships, get to know them. And that's exactly what I did. I chilled out a little bit with the performance anxiety. I decided to focus less on performing good quality work and focus more on actually getting to know my colleagues, integrating well into the team, and just becoming liked, trusted, and known by the team. And now a month later, I realize how good and essential this piece of advice is, because now I've created some amazing friends. My colleagues trust me, I trust them, I can ask them for help. It's just a very nice, friendly environment. Whereas if I wouldn't have paid attention to the colleagues in the beginning, I would not have become a part of the team so quickly. So I'm very happy I did this. So remember, if you're starting a new job, focus a lot on socializing in the beginning. There will be plenty of time to do work later. Moving on to the second mistake I did, particularly during the first week, and that was not taking enough breaks. I remember during my first days, I would get to work at 9 and I would sit in front of my computer until 12 o'clock for lunch. And then from 12:30, 1 o'clock, whenever I was done, I would just sit on my computer chair until it was time to go home. And I was completely brain dead by the time I got home. Even by 2 o'clock, I noticed that I didn't have that much energy left, and it was still half the workday left. And the reason for this lack of energy was that I was not taking enough breaks. I was so focused on trying to perform, to make good quality work. And to be honest with you, I would almost feel a little bit guilty if I took a break. And this was so stupid. I guess we all have to walk the walk in certain parts of life, but now I do this completely differently. I take breaks a lot of the time because when we stare at a screen, we're coding, we may sometimes get stuck. We get stuck a lot, and if I just whenever I get stuck, if I stand up, walk, have a look through the window, speak to a colleague, I come back, the problem I've been stuck on has suddenly been solved in the background in my brain. I'm Swedish, and in Sweden we've got this expression where it's like stare yourself blind, which is when you stare at a screen or something for too long and the longer you stare on the same problem, the blinder you get essentially. So take breaks. Don't feel guilty. There's no reason to feel guilty for taking breaks. Everyone does it. And I had this mindset when I was new, but there was no point, no reason to do it. And I get more done now that I take breaks as well. So it's a win-win situation for everyone. Now moving on to the third mistake I did, and that was not asking enough questions. And this is one of the most important things I can tell you here in this video, and that is to ask a lot of questions, because how else will you know how to do? I asked so many questions in the beginning that I almost felt annoying, but I'm so happy I asked all of these questions, because now, a month later, I know most of the things I need to know to perform my work in a quality way. Sure, I still ask a lot of questions because I'm relatively new, but it's reached a point now where my knowledge level is just a little bit below the rest of the team, which means that I'm quite independent. I'm able to function by myself. And the reason for this was that I was putting in a lot of effort actually getting to know, actually asking a lot of questions to the team. Now, obviously, we probably don't want to ask the boss or our colleagues a question every 5 or 10 minutes or so. That would be a little bit extreme. So I invented this new concept called bulk questions, which I've done for the past 3 weeks, and it's worked really well. Basically, what we do is as we progress through our workday, we come up with a bunch of questions that, sure, I would like to ask the boss, but I don't have to ask it right now. So I write these questions down on a piece of paper, and then whenever the boss or a colleague walks by, I ask them, and I sit down with them and I ask these 4 or 5 or however many questions I put on my piece of paper. So instead of interrupting them every 5 or 10 minutes for a short time, I interrupt them maybe every hour or 2 hours or once a day with my big list of questions. It just becomes more effective. For me, it's easier to take fewer but longer breaks talking to people than to take multiple short ones because we lose focus. So bulk questions, that's something you could try if you're starting out. The fourth big mistake that I made was not mastering Git and version control early on, and this was probably the biggest mistake I made during my first week. And my advice to you is to put some effort into figuring out how Git works at your workplace if you're a new coder, and if you're about to start working as a programmer, then do put a lot of effort into actually figuring out how version control works. Because during my first week, for the first 3 days, I fixed a bunch of bugs in my application. I was on fire, I was adding features, I was removing things that should have been deprecated, that kind of thing. But I did it all in the same commit on Git, which meant that I had just created a terribly disorganized mess. And then once my colleagues saw what I did, that I had put all the bug requests, all the bug fixes, feature requests into the same commit, we all realized the big mistakes I did. So what we typically do when we fix a bug is we fix the bug and then we put that in a commit on Git and it's gone. And then we fix the next bug in its own commit and then it's gone. But I put them all in the same one. But once we figure out that I screwed up in this way, because honestly, I had no idea that this was something I needed to do, my colleague sat down and helped me set this straight because I had socialized with them. I did my best to become known, trusted, and liked. And so they all helped me out to fix it. And it just ended up becoming a big learning lesson. It could have been way worse. So what I want to say with this is master Git early on. That could be the first thing you should do. Just figure out how it works so you don't have to spend the hours I had to spend fixing my mistake, because it can easily be avoided. Fifth mistake I made was to not test my stuff enough. Now, I've worked as a programmer now for about a month. I've been working with the same application, the same Windows program since the beginning. And I've now recently noticed that during my first week, the things I added weren't quite tested properly. I didn't test them enough. So there are some bugs that I created a while ago. And I've gone back and fixed all the bugs. I fixed the problem I caused, obviously. But these bugs could have all been avoided if I tested the features I added properly. So the way I work is that I get very eager. I implement something, I write it, and I sort of test it somewhat carefully. And I don't catch all the bugs, but I end up catching the bugs later. And sure, that will work if we're hobby programmers or program in school. But when we write professional code, everything needs to work. So I've had to train myself to be less eager to thoroughly test every feature I do to really make sure it works, so I don't let bugs slip past. So that's my advice to you if you're anything like me and you're eager and you want to move on and get things done. Take a deep breath, sit down with your code, test your new feature on your computer, see how it works, because that way you won't end up creating bugs as well. The sixth mistake I made was not knowing enough about documentation. Now, if you worked as a software engineer or as a coder, you're very familiar with the concept of documentation. It basically means that, at least in my company's case, for every application we make, we write a long Word document that contains information about how it works and how it's developed. Now, I didn't do that in the beginning. I was implementing all these features, making big changes to the program without updating the documentation, because I didn't know about the documentation. I think this week or like late last week, way into the employment, my colleague reminded me like, "Hey Vincent, have you checked out the documentation?" And I was like, "What?" So that was a mistake I made, and now I've had to go back, retrace my steps, and then put everything I've changed into the Word documentation thing. That could have easily been avoidable had I known that from the start, and this is something that us beginner programmers don't know, but it's something that's obvious for expert programmers or even those who worked for a short while. So if you're new and you're starting out as a coder, ask about documentation early on, and you won't have to retrace your steps and try to remember what did I actually do, because it will be easier for you. So learn about documentation. For number 7, we've got learning too much or learning too little. Now this is interesting. In the beginning, during my first days, I was stuck in tutorial hell. I was watching tutorials. I was scared to start working code. I was effectively procrastinating by watching YouTube tutorials, reading documentation, and I was actually not really getting started as much as I could have probably, because I was just stuck in tutorial hell. And then after realizing that, man, I'm just reading, I'm not actually writing enough code, I completely stopped reading and only wrote code, and I was implementing all the time. And then I realized that I was no longer learning so much. So I've been on both ends of the spectrum. I've been implementing too much, and I've been tutorialing too much. I've been reading too many tutorials, and the sweet spot is bang on in the middle, which I'm happy to say that I've found now. The way we do it is that we we figure out what feature we want to implement, read a reasonable amount of documentation for it so that we understand the underlying workings of it, and then we implement, so that we don't just rush past the tutorials and also don't get stuck in the tutorials. So find a good balance between actually reading tutorials and implementing work. I mean, sure, I learn a lot as I code and also as I read, but it's when we combine the two things we become really good developers, at least in my humble understanding. Now, moving on to the 8th big mistake that I made, and this is one I've been making very recently, and I just discovered it, I came up with it this morning, and that is getting up later and later. Now, as programmers, we usually don't do time-sensitive work. We have the privilege to come into the office whenever we want in the morning, right? So for me, I can come in at 7, 8, 10, doesn't really matter, right? Which is very unlike my previous job as a security guard, where I had to be in there at 8 o'clock and I had to leave at 4 o'clock. It was very time sensitive. But the thing I've noticed recently is that for every single workday, I get in a little bit later during work. And recently, I've been arriving at work at about 10 o'clock, which is not that nice in my opinion, because when I get home at night, it's already very late and I feel sluggish and I don't get so much done. And also, if we get up early in the morning, we have more energy, at least that's how it works for me. So the time freedom we have as programmers is sort of a double-edged sword. We're sure it's nice to have the freedom, but we should also be responsible and not get up too late. So starting today, you may be able to tell that I'm a bit tired. I've decided to set my alarm for 7:30 every day as long as this summer internship continues, so that I sort of get up early in the morning and get the day started so I don't come home so late. Don't make that mistake, and don't make any of the other 7 mistakes in this list either, because they're easily avoidable. And if you watched this far, you probably found this video valuable, and if you did, please click the like button as that helps out a lot. Leave your mistakes in the comments below. I think that would be fun for me to read as well. And if you're still watching, you may like this video in which I talk about 5 life-saving lessons I learned during my first week as a programmer. It's the most watched video on my channel, and I recorded it on the 3rd day as a coder. So that's a future classic. So I'll see you over there, and I hope you liked it. Bye.